You know how offices have the water cooler, while schools have the playground or the lunchroom. But now that COVID has taken those away, where's a kid to go for some gossip?
And I found a chat that had 128 participants on it.
Apparently, the wild, wild west of online chat rooms. And before you call us a bunch of narcs,
I challenge everyone to post pictures of yourselves.
hear us out.
There were some red flags that came up.
What do newspaper endorsements mean in a social media world? And our famous bookstore enters the fragrance biz. And to that I say, way ahead of you, pals. Here's the story. All right. Hi, I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. Pull out your phone, talk to us. As you know, we always want to hear what you have to say. Helps us steer the coverage. You can email us, thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook. Just type in Dan Haggerty, KGW. I'll pop right up, I promise. Or you can use Twitter and the hashtag HeyDan. Now, before we dig into the big story tonight, I want to start by talking about something that I think is pretty universal. I mean, we all remember being in school, right? How the playground was the center of our social lives, or maybe the cafeteria, something like that. Well, thanks to COVID, a lot of students just don't have that anymore. But what they do have now is easy access to technology during class, thanks to remote learning. And a lot of kids are using computers that are on loan from the school districts. And a lot of them, we found out, are using them for way more than schoolwork. Now, parents are wondering why Oregon's largest school district didn't give them a way to monitor what their kids are actually doing when they log on. Here's Kristen Severance.
Back when school was in person, parents of young kids may have worried about what was talked about on the playground or at recess. But in most cases, an adult wouldn't be far away. Now, with school online, all of those conversations are online too. And some parents say Portland public school officials are not doing enough to monitor what's being said.
I have no control over what happens in this Chromebook. And I have no control over what my kid is doing.
Anna Gross has a 3rd and 5th grader at Irvington Elementary School. She was surprised devices issued by Portland Public Schools don't have a parental control app.
That had bothered me, but I just accepted it as part of everything else with this pandemic, that, we're stuck with it.
Anna's daughter is in a learning pod with 2 other kids. The pod's instructor discovered the 3 students had been added to a chat through the Google Hangout app on the district-issued Chromebook. The chat had grown to more than 120 students from at least 3 schools: Irvington, Sabin Elementary, and Access Academy, an online school. The instructor only discovered it because she was looking at their screens. No other teacher could monitor what the chat was saying.
And then I found a chat that had 128 participants on it.
Heather Leon has a 5th grader at Access. She found out about the chat through Anna, then read the messages on her son's device.
It's just periodically there were some red flags that came up.
Students tried to remove themselves from the chat.
They kept getting added back in. So they were sort of forced into this conversation, against their will.
There was a lot of users listed as unknown.
Screenshots show all the unknown users. Someone posted an inappropriate cartoon. A 7th grader posted that they used their younger siblings' login information to join the chat.
And then that person posted a picture and said, "Here's me." I challenge everyone to post pictures of yourselves. So that was alarming.
Another student kept repeatedly asking for everyone's email addresses.
They also tried to get the kids onto a Zoom. Part of me wants to think that maybe I'm overreacting, but part of me is thinking, what if this is a predator that is posing as, another child and is trying to get my child or one of these other, over 100 vulnerable children to share a photo. My children were fortunate. They were being supervised by an adult, but there are a lot of working parents who don't have the ability to supervise their kids.
Irvington and Sabin shut off the chat to their students when they were notified. Access didn't. The chat was still active 2 weeks later. Kevin Crotchett is the director of learning technologies at Portland Public Schools. He does not believe the chat was set up with malicious intent.
It grew and grew until we had apparently quite a few kids from a number of schools, ranging in ages, talking with each other, doing what, in my perspective, kids do online, which is they engage socially.
From your perspective, can you see why the parents of the elementary school kids were upset when they found out about it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a parent of two myself. I definitely can understand. I mean, it's alarming to all of a sudden find out that this is there, and to see that it's being used, in a very kind of unsupervised way.
Crotched said the users may have been listed as unknown, but they were all PPS students. And while the chat was disabled for 2 schools, he said Google Hangouts is directly tied to the Google Video Meets function. Shutting off the chat district-wide would also turn off the Video Meets app, something teachers need.
And this is one of those weird things about technology. It's like, why would Google Hangouts chat affect Google Meets? And I'm not a computer engineer, I can't tell you that. But the systems are very integrally tied.
He said while the district can monitor devices, they do not have a parental control app, but they are looking into it. Parents have other options through their internet provider.
If they've got, any one of the major companies, they have parent controls on those. While we don't have a lot of the solutions on the Chromebook that's being loaned by Portland Public, there are definitely some solutions there as well.
Anna points to other large school districts that already have these tools. The Reynolds School District uses Securely, which provides both teacher supervision and parental controls. Beaverton has Classroom Orchestrator, which allows the teacher to see the student's screen in real time.
I would like PPS to give some parental controls to the Chromebook. I want to be able to set limitations. I want them to be very transparent about what limitations and restrictions they have set. I want them to be transparent about the security. I want them to talk about this.
Again, Portland public school officials are looking into adding some sort of parental control option on the devices.
So PPS, though, they say that it would be a real issue if they shut down Google Chat district-wide. But has any other school district encountered this or done that?
Yes, Beaverton. So their chief information officer told me Google Chat is something really districts across the country are struggling with. He said there's no limit to the number of students that can be added to a chat. Kindergarten students could be chatting with middle or high school students. He said there's no ability for IT personnel to delete the groups. I mean, it's a nightmare, and that's why Beaverton disabled Google Chats for the entire district.
Well, hopefully other people will figure out a way to follow. Kristen, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, let's move on to the big story now. And first, I want to take you back all the way to pre-COVID times when Portland City Council used to meet in person. Do you remember how nice that was?
Hey Dan, you piece of go to hell.
Don't spoil it.
Okay, different Dan, by the way. Democracy at work, anyway. City Council meets virtually these days, including this week when they discuss chopping another $18 million from the Portland Police Bureau budget. And if you're saying, but Dan, didn't the city already cut the police budget this year? Yes, imaginary person, they did. And now a couple commissioners want to cut some more. So dozens and dozens of people signed up for public comment, that portion of this week's City Council meeting, which, because it's on Zoom, means things did stay pretty civil, right?
First of all, Ted Wheeler, I've never felt so much anger towards an elected official.
It's okay to express frustration. It's okay if it's directed at me, but we can't have people coming on and saying the kinds of things you just said. Those aren't just our rules. Those are FCC requirements. So please, I would ask people respectfully, please don't drop the F-bomb during testimony.
Yeah, we got to apply to, those rules also apply to us, by the way. I have to watch my mouth. I would usually do this like a sailor, no offense to sailors. But yeah, things got pretty spicy in City Hall this week, and I'm going to let Pat Dorse take it from here.
After a summer of reckoning over social justice, Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, a longtime critic of the Portland Police Bureau, promised more cuts from the Bureau's budget. Wednesday night, she tried to push it through.
Decrease Bureau program expenses in the Portland Police Bureau's general fund by $18,022,101 in ongoing resources.
The money would come from eliminating positions left vacant by recent retirements and by cutting money from supplies like crowd munitions and riot gear. Hardesty instead wants the money used for emergency food programs and to support outdoor camps and toilets for the homeless, along with legal protections for renters. Commissioner Chloe Udaley supported Hardesty's plan. During the 5-hour virtual public hearing Wednesday night, nearly 200 people weighed in on both sides.
Oregon is one of the worst funded public health systems in the nation. I urge you to take this bold step.
We cannot wait anymore to make our city a safer place for the BIPOC community.
But others say it's a bad idea.
Further reductions in officers responding to 911 calls will only lead to more fear and an increased lack of confidence in Portland's ability to provide a safe environment for all.
Statistically, polls show the vast majority of Portlanders, 66% in the last poll, are not in support of defunding the police. Yet the vast majority of voices heard today on this call, a full 90%, actually a little bit over now, are in favor of this defunding. There is no question this is not a cross-section of our city's opinions.
Commissioner Amanda Fritz, who will leave the council when her term expires this year, said Hardesty was rushing the vote.
The vote was always scheduled for next week. It was Commissioner Hardesty who wanted to do it this week, but that's not what we usually do in the budget process. You hear the testimony, then you get your questions answered, and then it moves to the following week to make the votes.
At the end of the public testimony, Mayor Ted Wheeler said he wanted more time to think about the proposed cuts and how they would impact the city. Fritz joined him. And in his first major move as a newly elected city commissioner, Dan Ryan agreed and compared the rushed vote on the police cuts to the U.S. Senate's rush to approve Supreme Court Judge Amy Coney Barrett and said it's best to know the impact of decisions before the vote. The timing means the council now will next take up the issue after the election. Hardesty was furious over the delay, issuing a statement that reads in part, "I'm disappointed we have chosen to delay taking this long overdue step in addressing a system that has long unjustly targeted and criminalized Portlanders of color, houseless Portlanders, and Portlanders experiencing mental health crisis." Mayor Ted Wheeler also issued a statement that reads in part, "We will make changes, we will adopt reforms, and to do that well, we need to listen to everyone and ensure that we have a shared understanding of what will happen as a result of our decisions." Police Chief Chuck Lavelle also issued a statement. He said cutting $18 million from the budget would require significant layoffs and also the elimination of programs that would affect the livability of our neighborhoods. In Northeast Portland, Pat Doris, KGW News.
We should mention Commissioner Ryan has since apologized for that Supreme Court comparison, by the way. But Commissioner Hardesty made some more news late in the day by endorsing Mayor Wheeler's opponent, Sarah Iannarone. Hardesty is now the highest-ranking Portland city leader to endorse Iannarone. She wrote on Facebook that despite Portlanders calling for change, Portland leaders have been unable to deliver it. And doubling down in tonight's quote of the day, saying that, quote, "I finally realized that some of our leaders, including our current mayor, have failed." Hardesty's entire statement is up on her Joanne for City Council Facebook page. As for the other commissioners, Amanda Fritz is the only one to endorse Mayor Wheeler so far. To our knowledge, Commissioners Chloe Eudaly and Dan Ryan have not endorsed anyone yet. And despite being a newcomer to City Council, Commissioner Ryan is shaping up to be a key swing vote on whether Council decides to cut that additional $18 million from the police budget, and it made him a target of anti-police activists. We got something that we think is worth your time from OPB. Their story about demonstrators staging a late-night visit to Commissioner Ryan's home to try and convince him to vote to further defund the police bureau. The article also describes a moment where protesters attempted to prevent the media from taking photos of the event. Some interesting context in this story that we think is worth your time. Talk of cutting the police budget has been happening since spring. So how did we get here? Calls to defund the police hit a fever pitch after Minneapolis police killed George Floyd and set off weeks of protest across the country. In Portland, those weeks of protest became months. Activists here wanted to see $50 million cut from Portland police. All the while, the Bureau was actually set to receive $3 million more this year. But in response to all the protests, the City Council cut $15 million from the budget, which eliminated 84 positions. Commissioner Chloe Eudaly voted against it at the time, not because she opposed the cuts, but because she thought the cuts didn't go far enough. Then another $12 million was cut from the Bureau as part of a citywide budget tightening because of the pandemic. The protests and calls for defunding continued. So now Commissioners Eudaly and Joanne Hardesty are pushing for another $18 million in cuts. And right now, police funding makes up about 4% of the city's overall budget. And that's how we got here. All right, when the story continues, a Washington newspaper comes out with a political endorsement so controversial they're now ending endorsements altogether. But I talked to someone who says that's a bad idea. And Pals is giving you a chance to smell like a book. But I think the story might be able to one-up them with a fragrance of our own. All right, welcome back to The Story. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks to everybody reaching out using that hashtag HeyDan, or hit me up on Facebook or sending us emails. We're going to be reading some comments a little later in the show. If you remember, we touched on endorsements in the first part of the show. We're going to dive even more into that in just a second. But first, I want to talk a bit about voter returns and do a quick check on those numbers, starting with Washington. More than 2.7 million ballots returned across the Columbia. That's almost 57% of all voters. How about those numbers? And in Oregon, almost 1.7 million, also in that 57% range. The question is, which one of us is going to get to 60% first? It's a race. Go. We're going to have to find out, though, in a couple of days. Still, there are plenty of persuadable voters left out there. And while many in the past have turned to newspaper endorsements to maybe make a decision, we got to wondering just how useful are they, especially when there's so much distrust with the media, or when we are so divided as a country. Let's look at this endorsement in Spokane, Washington. Their newspaper there, the Spokesman Review. They endorsed both Governor Jay Inslee for re-election and President Trump. They wrote, "Donald Trump is a bully and a bigot. We recommend voting for him anyway." And then there was the New York Times, splitting the difference, if you remember, during the Democratic primary and endorsing both Senators Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar, ultimately batting 0 on both of those. And then in 2016, the Oregonian didn't endorse anybody. I guess you can't lose if you don't play. So, yeah, newspaper endorsements can be weird. I guess that's one way to put it. But they are also a time-honored tradition, and one that I think a lot of people don't seem to fully understand. To help us clarify, I talked to Dr. Peg Achterman, who teaches journalism at Seattle Pacific University.
What people forget, and what I catch my students on all the time, and I'm sure actually probably 70-80% of most viewers and readers forget that the endorsement comes from the opinions side, and it is on the opinions page of newspapers. And it's very well defined. There is an editorial board with newspapers, and used to be even in some television stations. So there was a board of people saying, here's why we're endorsing this person.
Now, Dr. Achterman also says an editorial board's endorsement from a credible paper can be controversial, mostly because they can actually matter to voters when making a decision.
The place where some of the research shows that they're very helpful are on issues and nonpartisan elections. So where people just can't discern because they might not vote a straight party ticket. Judges very often come up this way. So it's like, oh, okay, well, I need to read more about this person, and I need to read more about this person. So personally, I think endorsements are more in play in a mail-in situation, just because you're more likely to do a little more research, I think, especially on issues.
Now, that brings us back to that split endorsement in the Spokesman Review, the one that endorsed both Inslee and Trump. See, 3 days after they ran their endorsement, the paper then ran this column from the paper's editor, Rob Curley, announcing that the paper will no longer endorse candidates or publish unsigned editorials. Partly, he wrote, because of the hundreds of emails he got telling him he was a horrible human. I mentioned that to Dr. Achterman, and this is what she had to say.
I think deciding to not do them anymore because maybe they had some really strong feedback is cowardly.
Hot take, Doc. All right, we covered a lot of ground tonight. Hopefully you got some thoughts on it. If so, grab your phone, talk to us, look at your screen, email thestory@kgw.com, tweet us using that hashtag HeyDan. I'm going to read what you have to say after the break. And if that isn't enough to convince you to stick around, maybe my new fragrance will. Look, I know. We're all going a little stir crazy, all right? We miss our usual haunts. Some of our favorite places have shut down, but we gotta keep it together or we risk losing it. Like, I know we miss going into a crowded Powell's on a Saturday, browse the shelves, grab a cup of coffee, maybe hang out in the rare books room, but do we miss it this much? Powell's is coming out with its own fragrance called Powell's by Powell's. Just in time for the holidays, now you too can smell like books with a subtle hint of wood and violet. Just $25, decent price there. You can get this for the special man or woman in your life. They stress this is a unisex product. Anybody can smell like a book. Too bad we can't stand close enough to anybody to actually see what they smell like anymore, but we should tell you that Powell's isn't the only Portland institution to jump into the fragrance game. If you like watching the story, imagine if you could smell like the story. And I don't want to brag, but I'm wearing a little right now.
Perspiration. Deadlines. 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 Empty pizza boxes. Day-old voodoo donuts. Oh, the newsroom. Breaking news and arts.
Forgive me. Forgive me for that. There's nothing, I don't even know if there's anything to be proud of after that. But it smells fantastic. I don't know if we're going to make it for Christmas, but we'll pick a weird holiday, maybe like President's Day or something. We'll bring it out then. All right, so we got some comments to read. You know what, do we? I don't even know if we have time after that. Let's all just marinate in the scent of the story and enjoy the rest of our evening trying to forget that. Thanks for being with us. That's the latest from this show. 6:30, the news with Laura Porter. That's next.